What would be your advice for Egyptian exporters, Egyptian entrepreneurs? Because like your speech right now, the borders are no longer about just the products that we export to the United States, but any young group of entrepreneurs here in Egypt that can create an app can really cross all the borders and all that segmentation. So I want to divide it into two parts. The first part is being on strict manufactured goods to the United States, enhancing our quality and capacity and efficiency, so to be able to take more advantage of the United States market. Currently, we're exporting about $800 million worth. That is really insignificant. It came down from 1.4 billion 3-4 years ago. It should at least reach 3 billion to 5 billion. What are we doing wrong as Egyptian manufacturers in approaching the U.S. market on the goods side? And what are the opportunities for young entrepreneurs on the innovation technology side?
Well, Ashraf, I think there are a couple of pathways we could go there. I think one issue is, frankly, one of awareness. And I think this gets to one of the points tangentially that I raised just around partnerships. I agree with your opening statement this morning that ultimately this is in the hands of the private sector to make a business case as to why a product or a service ought to, be in a market. But I do think there is a partnership where the Egyptian government can play an important role in helping to, in some sense, raise the awareness of the Egyptian private sector and its capabilities in a very crowded market space like the United States. So I think there are many ways in which the Egyptian government can, in some sense, help open some doors, because there are truly there are programs and platforms that should bridge our two nations in terms of giving exposure to Egyptian manufacturers into the U.S. marketplace. So, for example, I think greater collaboration between our Department of Commerce and the ministry here can really, whether it's simple exposure at things like at trade fairs, but also deeper engagements. I talked a little bit about shared innovation infrastructure yesterday. There's a lot of experimentation taking place in the United States on developing new resources to help small, medium, and large companies better compete in the U.S. marketplace. Those shared platforms are open globally. Egyptian manufacturers can participate in these new manufacturing institutes, for example. There will be 15 of them by the time President Obama leaves office this November that are focused on the cutting edge of manufacturing innovation. So for companies in Egypt that are interested in fiber, textile, advanced composites, clean energy technology production, logistics, supply chain, there are going to be these grand test beds that are developing, and Egypt has the ability to engage and participate. Not only will that provide visibility to their goods and services into the U.S. market, but I think there would be a benefit back to Egypt, because it will expose Egyptian manufacturers to some of the most cutting-edge corporate partners, as well as resources like U.S. national laboratories and universities, which could, in some sense, I think, help bolster Egyptian manufacturing. So there's a win-win there. And that's just one example. So I think it's all about greater exposure, greater engagement, greater collaboration. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why the U.S. Council and the Global Federation exist, to try to help create this network and to share resources.
Thank you. That kind of makes sense. What can we do in the future in terms of integrating your knowledge and ideas and thoughts as the U.S. Council on Competitiveness? Of course, we have the UNCC here again. It's civil society in a sense, but one of the major shifts that happened in the GFCC is actually allowing or having global trade matters become part of your global competitiveness network, and that shows that you are moving and shifting towards also focusing on the private sector being part of this whole concept. Now, what can we do? How can the GFCC, in a sense, be of help to the Egyptian private sector in approaching what we're talking about in terms of awareness, in terms of really understanding market segmentation in the United States, understanding the concept of market research and marketing in the U.S. We already have a problem in marketing here in Egypt. There isn't a high belief in marketing. We believe in advertising more than anything else. But how can we really approach that mentality? And what can the GFCC within the next probably year help out Egyptian companies?
I think one of the most, and this may be a longer term project than just the next 12 months, but I think a lot could be done in 12 months. I think even more could be done if we were to look out 5 years from now, if the GFCC were able to collaborate with Global Trade Matters and others in Egypt to articulate an innovation agenda for the country. One of the most important things that happened in the United States over the past 15 years was this true embedding of the innovation concept into almost everything that's happening in the private sector as well as the public sector. The recognition that the ability to change, quickly adapt, as disruptive and difficult as it can be, but ultimately lead to longer-term benefits, has been tremendously important in the United States. That agenda, though, was driven by the private sector. It was done so in partnership with the public sector, but it was the U.S. private sector that truly articulated for the first time what really mattered for the long-term trajectory of the United States. And I think one of the outcomes that we can point to as a success and perhaps a model for Egypt, that private sector agenda did become embedded in legislation. Probably the most significant and only lasting bipartisan piece of legislation in the United States over the past decade, the America Competes Act, was a direct outcome of the innovation agenda efforts of the U.S. Council and other partners. And that set the agenda, the tone for the past 10 years around how do we double investment in research and development in the physical sciences? How do we rebalance against over-dependence on life sciences? How do we double the number of scientists and engineers in the country? How do we create these national networks of manufacturing and innovation? Why do we prioritize around the future of clean energy technology manufacturing? All of these efforts really came from that first kernel of identifying innovation matters. And this is the agenda, very tight, 3 or 4 pillars that we must focus on as a nation. So I think that's a contribution. It's not going to be the same in Egypt as it was in the United States, but I think that's one of the ideas that the U.S. Council is bringing to the Global Federation, and I think is open to sharing and engaging and in some sense imparting some of the lessons we've learned, but also willing to engage in the experimentation in Egypt and other nations. And that really was, in some sense, the U.S.'s desire to help create and start and participate in this global federation.
I have 2 final questions for you. The first being talking about innovation, business sophistication. When you hear countries like the United Arab Emirates working on the mission to Mars, an unmanned mission to Mars in 2020, having unmanned transportation in their cities. When we talk about innovation, when we talk about these technologies here in Egypt, we tend to have this direction towards prioritizing, in a sense, even just psychologically, where we say, we're not at that level where we're looking at a space program or looking at an unmanned mission to Mars. We've got problems with our sewer infrastructure, and we're just trying to, catch up on energy demand, and there are major priorities, and hence the concept of high technology innovation, business sophistication usually takes, 10 seats back. How can a nation balance between both really building an infrastructure that will take us into the future, but at the same time not neglect the innovation, technology, and business sophistication?
I think it's a good point. And the moon shot or the Mars shot, President Obama announced, a major effort around cancer and the brain. So these massive national goals, and some of which, you've discussed in the UAE they're pursuing, they are important, but they're not the only thing. I look at the United States today, and I know we had the interesting discussion yesterday on infrastructure. When I look at the U.S., and I think there is roughly today $4 trillion of needed new innovation and investment in our infrastructure. So that's 1/4 of our GDP is needed today just to maintain bridges, sewers, water pipes. This is for many innovators in the U.S. sense, the tremendous opportunity space. So what I think I would echo you in simply saying that innovation occurs at all levels of society, and there are tremendous benefits. So I would actually focus on what your strengths and assets are. It would be great to get to Mars, and I hope we do get to Mars as a society and as humanity.
I think we're already living in Mars.
Yeah, but there are many things that need to be done and can be done here that will create tremendous value not only for the companies and the entrepreneurs, but for society at large. And so we don't really see a differentiation between low-tech and high-tech. It's how you apply innovative thinking, innovative business models, innovative financing to solve some of these global grand challenges that I think are going to be what will ultimately be truly the long-lasting contribution to humankind.
My final question to you, and regarding our initiative with the Tahya Masr National Development Fund. As you saw yesterday, we launched the the Tahya Masr Global Ambassadors Initiative, and the purpose behind that is for us to solidify our efforts towards engaging the Egyptians living abroad, working abroad, across the world, in a sense. The United States has a fantastic group of Egyptians that have either migrated to the United States or are working in the U.S. or studying in the U.S., teaching in the U.S. Very, very fantastic minds. People like I just won't mention the Zuwail and the the Elbaz. I'm talking about every regular. When I went to university in the States, I had at least 2 management professors that were Egyptian. And that is across the board. Now, my question to you is, in our effort in building innovation capacity and really moving Egypt forward, how can we engage Egyptian intellectuals living in the United States on a more, how can I say, scientific level, and take advantage of them and their need or want to help Egypt reform and go through this transitional period? So what do we need to do to engage these?
Well, I think, first of all, the ambassador program is a fantastic first step. The United States has benefited and continues to benefit, although perhaps less than it has in the past, from this grand global diaspora. And that has been a tremendous asset for us. But I think what we see in the United States is this interest and willingness for people to re-engage with their countries of origin. And so I think the ambassador program is one important first step because it raises visibility. It's signified as being important. These things matter. But I think the potential for the ambassador program goes much deeper because they can begin to create this true diaspora network in the United States. It's not that everyone's going to move back to Egypt. Some might, but some will engage more, come back, invest, do research and development here. It's about communication. I can give you an example. We launched a similar program in the United States, the U.S. Council, with our Brazilian counterpart. And we have something now called the Brazil Diaspora Network, BSN. The Brazil Diaspora Network now engages thousands of Brazilian scientists and engineers, entrepreneurs. Who knew there are that many in the United States? But even more than that, who knew that so many would want to give back to Brazil? They haven't lived in Brazil in 20 years, but they do. And this has been tremendously important. And coupled to that effort has been, again, this is why the partnership between the public and private matters so much. That Brazil Diaspora Network was a private sector-driven effort. But the Brazilian public sector found out about it. They heard it. They listened. And President Rousseff at the time created the Science Without Borders program, which was a globally ambitious effort to send 100,000 Brazilian students abroad to learn from the best, which in and of itself is a great idea. But when those students started coming to the United States, those students began to link with the Diaspora Network. And so there was a multiplier effect. You see students now connecting with Brazilian entrepreneurs in the United States and bringing ideas back to Brazil, bringing Brazilian ideas to the United States. So again, it's a win-win proposition there. So I think what one could think about with the ambassadorship program that was just launched here for Egypt is to begin to even think, what's the future for that program? How can you truly begin to use those ambassadors and leverage them, really make them work and to really bring back value to Egypt? And I think if you can do that, if the nation can do that, that will be a tremendous investment for the future.
Mr. Chad Evans, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.